start for us.
All right, honorable judge, Mr. Raymond is presenting.
Please be seated. Mr. Defense Attorney, you may begin.
Good morning. Today you will hear testimony from four girls: Courtney Smith, Morgan Button, Caitlin Ford, and Street, as to why they are not the robber. The girls drive one of the following colors of cars: violet, yellow, blue, and black. While one of them is the robber, you can prove through their statements that my client, Courtney Smith, is innocent.
Thank you. District Attorney?
The reason why we're here today is to prove that the defendant, Courtney Smith, robbed the Bank of North America on Main Street. You will hear evidence that shows that Ms. Smith is a robber and should be convicted of this crime.
Mr. Defense Attorney, you may call your first witness.
Thanks. I call Courtney Smith. Please state your name to the court.
Courtney Smith.
Ms. Smith, you have been accused of robbing the bank on Main Street. Mr. Jones told the court earlier that the robber was seen in a black car.
My favorite colors are black and violet, and my car is from these colors when I was working at the time of the robbery.
Thank you, Ms. Smith.
All right, so let's stop there for just a second. Courtney says that her favorite colors are black and violet, and her car is one of these colors. So where am I going to put X's?
Blue and yellow.
Okay. So go ahead and do that if you haven't already. All right, Mr. District Attorney?
No questions, Your Honor. Your Honor.
Mr. Defense Attorney, you may call your second witness.
I would now like to call Ms. Morgan Button. Please state your name for the court.
Is that me?
Yes,
Morgan Bud.
Ms. Morgan, please tell us why you're not the bank robber.
Well, I wouldn't be caught in a yellow or violet car.
Thank you.
all right, so she wouldn't be caught in a yellow or violet car, so mark that on Morgan's. Mr. District Attorney?
No questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Defense Attorney, you may call your third witness.
Defense calls Caitlin Ford. Please state your name for the court.
Caitlin Ford.
Ms. Ford, please tell us why you're not the bank robber.
The color of my car is one of my favorite colors, blue and yellow.
Go ahead and mark that down.
Thank you.
Mr. District Attorney? We'll
No
go over
questions,
that.
Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Defense Attorney, you may call your fourth witness.
Please call Emma Straight to the stand. Please state your name for the court.
Emma Straight.
Ms. Straight, please tell us why you're not the bank robber.
First of all, I don't like black guys. First of all, I don't like black cars. They get too hot. I would never buy a yellow or violet car.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Go ahead and mark that. Emma does not like black cars and would never buy a yellow or violet car. Okay, so according to that information, what color must Emma drive? Blue. Okay. Mr. District Attorney?
The prosecution rests.
Thank you. At this time, I would like for the jury to deliberate and determine the verdict of Courtney Smith. Please take 5 to 10 minutes to determine your verdict. Okay, so we already know who drives the blue car, right? That means nobody else can drive the blue car. So if you didn't already have an X for blue on anybody else, go ahead and fill those in. All right, and that should let us know what another car is driven by a certain girl. So give yourself a second, go ahead and fill in the rest of the table if you haven't already. Okay, so we were able to tell that Emma drove the blue car from her statement, which meant nobody else drove the blue car, right? So what did that mean that Caitlin drives?
Yellow.
All right. And what does that mean that Morgan drives?
Black.
And if Morgan drives black, Courtney must drive. I'm sorry, violet. Yes, I put the X in the wrong spot. All right. So, according to our defense, the criminal was driving a what color car? What did we say in the beginning? So who ended up committing the crime? Morgan. Okay, so Morgan would have been convicted of the crime here. All right. All right, so. All right, so first we are going to fill in what the definition of a conditional statement is. So right below this chart on your notes, there should be a place to fill this in. So a conditional statement is basically some predictions based on inductive reasoning, or the process of observing data, recognizing patterns, and making generalizations from your observations. So that's almost exactly what we did here, right? We were given some statements, and then we used our inductive reasoning to come up with who we decided ended up committing the crime, right? So you just use this, use these statements that are being made to come up with some conclusion, right? Okay? These are typically written as what we call if-then statements, okay? So an if-then statement is a form of our conditional statements. This is typically how you'll see them written. And it's denoted by P implies Q. So this little arrow just means the word implies, basically. Okay? Alright, so P implies Q. What this means is whatever they state first implies whatever is stated second. Alright? So if-then statements are going to be made up of some hypothesis, which should be stated first in the sentence, which is like our P in the P implies Q. And then it also will have a conclusion stated second in your sentence. So typically, whenever we are writing an if-then sentence, the sentence will start out with the word if, and your hypothesis is what follows that word. Okay, so your hypothesis is the part after the word if. So if, whatever they say is the hypothesis, comma, then your hypothesis follows. Okay? So, maybe when you were younger, in elementary school, you may have read the book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, right? If you give a mouse a cookie, then, and it was just a series of events, right? Okay, I also have a short little video for us to watch. It was a commercial that was made up completely of conditional statements, right? So these are going to tell you, if this, then this event should follow, right? This is my hypothesis, this is what will occur, all right? So let me pull that up real quick.
When you pay too much for cable, you feel down. When you feel down, you stay in bed. When you stay in bed, they give your job to someone new. When they give your job to someone new, he has a lot to learn. When he has a lot to learn, mistakes are made. And when mistakes are made, you get body slammed by a lowland gorilla. Don't get body slammed by a lowland gorilla. Get rid of cable and upgrade to DirecTV. Call 1-800-DirecTV.
All right, so then this just goes on, right? They say if this happens, then this is what's going to happen next, and so on. All right? Okay, so let's see here. All right, so next we have our conditional statements, okay? So first, I believe, oh, sorry, we already filled in this part. So the first statement that I believe that they give you is all panthers are cats, okay? They want us to turn this into an if-then statement, all right? So we're not going to change the order of what they have written here. I'm just going to break it up into a hypothesis and a conclusion. So what they listed first must be my hypothesis, which is the part about it being a panther, right? So I would somehow manipulate that part to say, if it is a panther, or if the animal is a panther, then it is a cat, right? So this would be an example of turning this conditional statement into an if-then statement. The animal is a panther, then it is a cat. So it was still a conditional statement here. We just turned it into an if-then conditional statement. All right, and then they've got one more example for you there. So this next one reads, the sum of two odd integers is even. So again, I don't want to change the order of what's written here. I just want to turn it into an if-then sentence. So try converting this into an if-then statement on your own. I'll give you just a second to write that out. All right, so let's see. It should have been written as something along the lines of, if two integers are odd, then their sum is even. So we kept that sum, we kept the integers part there at the beginning, and then we concluded that their sum would be even. All right? As long as yours is close to this, your wording does not need to be the exact same as mine. All right? We got two odd integers, their sum would be even. Also, just a little hint, and you don't have to write this down if you don't want, but typically this is going to break at the verb. Put your phone up. Typically this will break at the verb, and this is where you would separate your if and your then. Okay? All right. The last thing that we need to make note of here on the front page is what a counter example is. Okay? So a counter example is an example to prove that the hypothesis is true and the conclusion is false. So basically it's going to agree with the if part and disagree with the then part. Okay? So your hypothesis part holds true, your conclusion is what would be false. Okay. And once you have that written down, whenever you flip it over onto the back, there are a few practice examples where they already wrote the sentence. They just want you to underline what part you think the hypothesis is and circle the conclusion. Okay, so these are not already written as if-then statements, so it's not as easy to see. So you underline the hypothesis and circle the conclusion on those 8 examples. So I'll give you a second to do that before we check our answers here in just a minute, okay? So underlining the hypothesis and circling the conclusion. Give you a second to look at those and underline and circle what you think is what. So remember, we're thinking about this as what is going to imply the second thing. So what has to happen for the second thing to happen, right? Okay, looks like most of us have these done, or at least the first few, so let's go ahead and start checking them. On number 1, which part did we underline? Right, it was written as that implies way, right? We talked about on the front, P implies Q, and P is always our hypothesis, Q the conclusion. Oops, I also already gave 2 here. All right, so in this one, K is the midpoint of JL if JK equals KL. So this one they told you which was the hypothesis, right? Because they put that word if. And our hypothesis always follows the word if. They just didn't have that word then in there, so they kind of switched it up on us, right? So we know that K would be the midpoint if those two pieces are equal, right? All right, now on number 3, which part did we underline on number 3? After N, yeah, So that part would be our hypothesis. If we know that N is greater than 7, then we can say that N is greater than 8. All right, on number 4, which part did we underline? If you dive, then I'll dive, right? So if this person dives, then the other person will do it. Good. All right. Okay. On number 5, which part did we underline? A equals B, right? So that one is already written as an if-then statement, right? Okay, on number 6, which part did we underline? Right, the A plus C equals B plus C, right? Because it's following that word if, it must be our hypothesis, and after the word then must be our conclusion. Good. All right, on number 7, which part did we underline on number 7? Right. That part has to happen first, right? Before he will sing. All right, and then last one, number 8. What part did we underline on this one? People who live in Texas, right? We have to know that information first before we can draw the conclusion of that they live in the United States. Very good. All right, so we've gotten pretty good here at identifying our hypothesis and conclusion. We just talked about counterexamples there on the front, right? And we said that a counterexample is going to agree with the first part, or your hypothesis, but disprove or make that conclusion false, right? So let's look at some counterexamples. So it says, provide a counterexample to disprove the statement. Okay, so number 9 says, if Rachel is 16 years old, then she has obtained her driver's license. Okay, so we're not debating the fact that Rachel is 16, right? We can agree with that. But does she have to have her driver's license just because she's 16? What would be a reason she might not have it? Didn't pass the test, right? Very good. So not passing her driving test would be a counterexample to this statement, okay? So we agreed with the part that she was 16. We're just saying just because she's 16, she doesn't necessarily have her driver's license. And this would be a reason why she might not, right? And there's often more than one counterexample, right? Maybe she hasn't taken her test yet, right? Something like that. All right, number 10 says if a number is divisible by 4, then it is divisible by 6. So can you guys think of a counterexample to disprove that? Right, just pick any number that is divisible by 4, but is not divisible by 6, right? So 20 would work, 16 works, or any number that you can think of that agrees with the first part, but disagrees with that second part there, okay? All right, then examples 11 and 12 want you to rewrite the given statements as if-then statements. So they already gave you some conditionals. You're just rewriting them as if-then. Okay, So remember, we don't want to rewrite the sentence. We're not trying to change the order of what they said here. We're just turning it into an if-then. So number 11 says congruent segments are segments that have equal lengths. So what would I want to put after the word if? So remember, we're not switching the order, right? The first part is acting as like my hypothesis. The second part is my conclusion, right? So if somebody didn't show you a picture of the line, then unless they tell you it's congruent, you couldn't draw a conclusion that that means they're equal, right? Because you can't see it. So the way we would write this if-then statement would be, if the segments are congruent, then the segments have equal lengths. So typically we're not going to change up the order of the information that was given to us, right? The segments having equal lengths was at the end, so that should be our conclusion, while congruent segments was at the beginning, so it's probably going to be in our hypothesis. Okay? All right, number 12 says an equilateral triangle consists of 3 congruent angles and 3 congruent sides. So what would be my if or my hypothesis here? So what's the first part they tell me? What did they say we have? What did they say it is? So if it's an equilateral triangle, then that information should follow, all right? So if a polygon, or if it is an equilateral triangle, then it's going to have 3 congruent angles and 3 equal sides. Okay? So don't try and make it harder than it has to be. You're just going to literally take whatever they said first, make that your if, and then the second part should be your conclusion. And it should kind of make sense, right? You know, if you have an equilateral triangle, then all of the sides would be congruent and all the angles would be congruent, right? Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about here is negation, okay? So, negation is just basically using the word not, or beginning a statement with, it's not the case that, whatever follows, right? It's not the case that if you have an equilateral triangle, then, and so on, okay? So it's basically just using that word not. It's going to go against whatever you previously had written, okay? And, you know, we earlier said that P implies Q with the little arrow was the way you denote, right, your conditional. The way you denote a notation, a negation is with this symbol right here, okay? So you would just put this before whatever it is that you're going to negate, if we were just using symbols. All right? Okay, and that is it for today's lesson. So I'm going to pass out the practice that goes with this. It's really not too much work. Basically, you are picking out the hypothesis and the conclusion from some statements, or they give you a statement, you turn it into an if-then. All right? Then, I don't think it's until the back. Yeah. Then the last 2 questions, 9 and 10, ask you for a counter example of the sentence given. All right?